But I'll be ranking the entire John Pertwee era of Doctor Who with Tiermaker. So, if you're not familiar, I'll be ranking the stories in his era using Tiermaker. And as you can see, the tier lists on the left hand side there are as follows: Bonafide Classic. These are stories that are considered to be the best of the John Pertwee era. Near Classics. Brilliant stories, but not necessarily classics. I mean, they have the potential to have been, but couldn't really reach it. Stuck in the middle are good stories, but they are quite faulty. Just meh stories, and no, just no, pretty much the opposite of bona fide classics. Oh, bad eggs. So let's get cracking with Invasion of the Dinosaurs right off the bat. No, just no. I mean, it is a story that's well loved by a lot of Third Doctor's fans, but as I said before in my review, it's just I watched it 3 times. I couldn't really get properly into it. It's just very boring. And just the plot issues are just a bit too much for me to even like this story. So if you want to hear my more thoughts on this story, watch my review on that. Is that Time Warrior? Bonafide classic. I mean, I really love this story. I do think that the Time Warrior is probably the best Sontaran story ever because I mean, it literally has everything. I mean, it's literally because it's very different to other stories in the Third Doctor era. I mean, you have like the debut of Sarah Jane, the Third Doctor in the TARDIS, and obviously this is his first story, his only stories to say that per se to actually take place in the past. You have Sontaran's iconic villains such as Iron Gron and the Sontaran himself. It's just in the setting and the filming is brilliant. I mean, I really like the story. It's one of my favorites. Day of the Daleks. I think it's. I mean, I wouldn't say maybe because it is a good story. I mean, I say I'm stuck in the middle because I mean, it's a good story, but it's just. And I mean, I think the pacing wasn't really that. It's not fantastic. I mean, yeah, it's a good story, but I do think the ending was a bit rushed and yeah, it could have been a lot better. I mean, this is the first appearance of the Daleks since the evil of the Daleks back in 1967, and obviously the Daleks are very rusty to say. Well, not physically, but just the writing is a bit rusty. The sounds are a bit off, and I think John Pertwee even admitted he had difficulties filming alongside the Daleks, and I don't really blame him because you can see him trying to like struggle to act alongside them. But obviously you have the Ogrons, and they made the story a little bit better, and the plot was a little bit confusing. So yeah, I'd say it's stuck in the middle. The Claws of Axos. I mean, if it wasn't for certain aspects in the story, I'd have put it here, but I think it's a mess story. I mean, I just found it boring to be honest. I mean, the other parts in this story I liked were just the master and the whole plot, the whole little political plot, but it's just the story itself ain't that fantastic, to say the least. The Time Monster. A lot of people put it here, but I think it's a middle. I say it's a stuck in the middle story. I mean, yeah, I do think that it is dragged out a little bit. I mean, especially, but the dragon is definitely seen in the Atlantis portions of the story. But the plot is actually decent. I mean, it's not that bad. I mean, the acting's good. They've had good humor. The master's all right in it, and the set designs are good, and the special effects are okay. And I really like the Doctor's fishbowl TARDIS, and it looks really fun. And I think John Pertwee's acting was good. Katie Manning was good as Joe. I mean, it's a nice little unit story, and I don't think it's that bad a story to say the least. I mean, I do think doesn't really deserve the hate it gets. I think I'm one of the only few people that actually like this story. Frontier in Space. I'd say it's a near classic because I mean I love the tension and sorry I live near a train station, but I love the tension in the story. I mean it's just like the political thriller aspects. It literally just grabs you from the get go. It's just from the first 5 minutes with like the shape shift, like the fear machine that makes you think. It makes you see what you fear, and obviously how the master's pretty much manipulating, and how the Doctor and Joe were pretty much accused of being terrorists or along those lines. It's a brilliant story. I really love it. I mean, I think this is definitely one of John Pertwee's best stories, and definitely one of the best stories in season 10. Planet of the Daleks, I pretty much say it's the same thing. I mean, it's a great story, an iconic story. It's a great story, not necessarily a bona fide classic, but I think a main issue with this story is that it's pretty much very the same as the first ever Dalek story. I mean, it's just, I mean, I think it tries to be a sequel, but at the same time, it pretty much copies pretty much a lot of the aspects from the first Dalek story into this one, to say the least. I mean, the acting's good. I like the continuity of the story, and I like how the first Doctor, Ian, Susan, and Barbara are pretty much legends amongst the Fowls. But there's just a lot of aspects in this story you can see are very, like the illness, the Doctor's companion falling in love with one of the Fowls, house and everything. Is just, I mean, if it was more original, I'd probably put it here. But obviously, it just does lose marks for originality. And obviously, this is Terry Nation's first Dalek story since, I believe it's the Dalek's master plan, and obviously he has some rust with him. So yeah, the Three Doctors are put as a bona fide classic because I honestly do think this is probably one of the best, if not the best, multi-Doctor story ever. Because I really like. I mean, there's a very fun story as well. Obviously, this is the first, and this is the story in which the Doctor's exile is lifted because he was able to help the Time Lords defeat Omega and sort whatever the hell was going on there. And obviously he's helped out by his previous incarnation, the second Doctor and the first Doctor. And I love like the act, like the sort of camaraderie between Patrick Charlton and John Pertwee. And even though they did have a bit of a rivalry, but it was still very fun. It was very fun. I loved the bickering, and I loved the scene in the towards the end of the first one, the second Doctor just randomly shows up in the third Doctor's TARDIS, and they were just bickering. They were just immediately bickering, and how Joe was like, "Who's he?" And then the third Doctor was like, "He's me." The Doctor was like, "He's me and I'm him." It's a very fun story. That I definitely think it's one of the highlights of season 10 and the John Pertwee era overall. The Demons. I think it's a near classic. Yeah, I definitely put it as a near classic. I mean, a lot of people put it here, but I do think that there are some. I think it would have been better as a six-parter because it did seem a bit rushed at the end. But the overall mood of the story is amazing. I mean, it's scary, it's fun. I do think they could have at least done a little bit. They could have at least dabbled into more of the supernatural elements. I mean, there's a very fun story, and there's a very good end to season 8, and concludes the master storyline for that season as well. And unit were great. The Brig was good, even though he was only there for like he didn't really do much damage towards the end of the story. But I think it's very, and we obviously have Benton and yes, they were pretty much doing their endeavors and trying to do whatever they were, and they did a good job as well. And I think the Doctor and Joe's relationship is pretty much strong here, and I think it definitely cements Joe's character development because she is pretty much the one that saves the day in the story when Azal was trying to pretty much was going to kill the Doctor, and then Joe pretty much offered to sacrifice herself, and obviously Azal was very confused, and he ended up killing him, and he ended up dying from it. And it was a pretty good story, and I think it definitely makes her one of the best companions, and my favorite companion ever. Inferno. No choice about that one. I mean, it's a very iconic story for a lot of reasons. I think my friend says this is one of his favorite Doctor story ever. I mean, I don't blame him because it's a very tense story, and obviously this is the first story to at least introduce use parallel universes, and they did that phenomenally. And the acting from the parallel universe side was just amazing. And obviously, I think Nicholas Courtney did a great job as the brigade leader, and I think Liz Shaw was great as not Liz Shaw, Caroline John was good as the section leader. I think they all had a blast in the story. And you can really tell that everyone pretty much had fun with this with their alter egos, and it's a very fun story. The villains were good, especially that what's his name? I think whatever his name, but he was actually a very good villain. I think Sutton. No, Sutton was a good guy, wasn't he? I mean, Professor Storman. Yeah, Professor Storman was a great villain in both his parallel universe side and his normal universe. stuff. And obviously, I like the ending of part 6 when the Doctor was unable to save the parallel universe, and he pretty much had to go back to Earth, and go back to his universe to try and prevent the same fate that happened to the parallel universe to happen to that side of the Earth as well. It's a brilliant story to say the least. Whew. So the Green Death, another bona fide classic. This is one of my favorite John Pertwee stories ever because definitely has the political aspect to it. Such as the global warming, so not global warming, like the pollution and everything to it, and obviously like how it's set in the Welsh countryside, and it's definitely a good story for Joe Grant as well. This is actually her departure story. She decides to stay behind on Earth when she falls in love with Professor Jones, and that was, even though it's a little bit rushed, but you can tell that the two had chemistry together, and even in the new show, they're pretty much still together. And then that's just how great this episode was, this story was, and obviously the acting by Katie Manning and John Pertwee was just phenomenal. I think this is probably one of their best performances ever, especially for Katie Manning. And I love the departure scene when Joe was like having tears in her eyes, and the Doctor was just driving away on Bessie over the sunset. It was just so poetic. And obviously the story, the villain itself, Boss, he was fantastic. And I think the giant maggots as well, they were quite scary. And I love the scene when one of the giant maggots just turns into a big fly, and it's just a phenomenal story. I really love it. Colony in Space. This might be an unpopular opinion, but I think it's a near classic. It is a very good story to say the least. Yeah, it is a bit long, but it's actually not so bad. I like the political issues of the story as well, like the issues of like colonialization and how like corporations are trying to like exploit the other people. It's a very cool story. I think to get through this, you just need to like have the patience for and the understanding for it. Maybe it's my John Pertwee bias, but I really love this story. I don't love it, but I really like this story. And obviously, this is the third Doctor's this trip on board the TARDIS since his exile, or his first proper trip, right? Because obviously he'd been monitored by the Time Lords. Well, I wouldn't say monitored. The Time Lords pretty much sent him to Xerius to try and sort out what was going on there. And this is another Master story, and I think the Master doesn't actually show up until later on. Like, he doesn't show up until at least later on in the story. And yeah, it's iffy, but it's iffy part of the story, but it's still quite good as well, to say the least. Death to the Daleks. I'd say it's a mess story. Wait. Interesting. I mean, I wouldn't say. I think I just put it as meh because even though part one of the story is actually very good, but just other than that, the other parts were just very slow and they weren't that interesting. And the Daleks themselves, they weren't that good character. They weren't written properly, and I think they were just very weak. And the acting was good to say this. John Pertwee did his best. Elizabeth Staten did her best as Sarah Jane. The side cast were okay, and the cliffhangers were a bit iffy. But I like the location filming, and I love how I think I honestly can't remember this. I think the main city as well the main city set was good as well, but then the excellent city, yes, the excellent city. The sets were good, but I think that's pretty much what the story actually has. And the faulty aspects of, obviously, as I said, the Daleks weren't written very well, and the part 3 cliffhanger was just stupid. And I think it had the Doctor, one of the Excelons were trying to make their way across the floor, and then the Doctor was like, "Stop! Don't move!" And it just shows the checkered floor, and I'm just like, "What?" But anyways, no, it could have been a good Dalek story, but it could have been a better Dalek story. It's just so many faults in the story. Pretty much just let the story down. It doesn't really help that it came after the invasion of the dinosaurs as well. Yeah. The Mind of Evil, my second favorite John Pertwee story, is a bona fide classic. It's literally, I think this is probably one of the best examples of Doctor Who does James Bond. It has a James Bond feel to the story that's pretty much amazing. I mean, the tension of the story, especially with the Keller Mind Machine, is just with the Keller Mind Machine. It literally just attacked like how like the music playing. It was just so phenomenal. And I think the part two cliffhanger is just. I mean, it's memorable in my eyes. I think it's the only one that's actually different to the other cliffhangers because they're all pretty much the same. With the doctor and Joe were being attacked by the Keller Machine. I think this one, I think the American Senate or the American whatever was being attacked by Chin Li or not being attacked. I think she was turning into a dragon. But I think it was just like a mind mission. And obviously in the part three, the Doctor and the Brigadier walk in, and obviously we see an Axe in a very dodgy dragon suit. And obviously with the music playing as well, I think it just really makes the story amazing. And I think another favorite scene of mine from The Mind of Evil was when Chin Li was actually trying to was attacking Benton, and the music playing as well. It was just, and I think this is actually my favorite master story for overall for the John Pertwee era because I think this is Roger Delgado's best master performance ever because if you definitely see the damage that Master does and he has proper interactions with the Doctor. Aside from that little bit in Terror of the Autons, we get to see what the Master is capable of. With disguises and everything, this is pretty much a story that actually establishes the Master's character for who he is, to say the least. The Monster of Peladon, I'd say, is a near classic because it's a sequel to the Curse of Peladon, but I think it does some stuff a bit better than the Curse of Peladon itself. I love like the women's liberation bit that Sarah Jane was mentioning to the Queen Thaleria, and obviously and I like how this story is pretty much an explanation of what actually happened when Planet Peladon joined the Galactic Federation. Obviously, the Galactic Federation is was pretty much Doctor Who's version of the European Union, and obviously Costa Peladon was trying to was about like England joining the EU or Peladon joining the Galactic Federation, and this story was basically what happened after the Galactic Federation and how the miners were pretty much just cast aside, and obviously having a female leader. So it just pretty much made things interesting to say the least, and obviously Theoria isn't as confident as her father was. I think that pretty much made the story somewhat better to say the least. And the acting was good as well. I liked the bit when I think towards the end of the story, well, slightly towards the end, I think the Doctor was attacked by one of the Sonic Lances, and then he's pretty much near death. And when Sarah Jane was telling someone, and was like how Sarah Jane was like, the Doctor was like, you always tell her when there's life, there's something, and that pretty much foreshadows the Doctor's regeneration at the end of Planet of the Spiders, the following story. And it's a very underrated story. A lot of people actually hate it, but I think it's a really good story to say the least. The Mutants, another underrated story, which I think is a near classic. I love the apartheid feel to this story, and obviously the sets were amazing. I really liked the ship. I think the Marshal was a great villain. The acting by John Pertwee was great. Katie Manning was great in the story. And obviously, I think why I think the story is good because it has a black character who's not disposable. He actually gets to live to the end, even though he was unfortunately named Cotton, but fair enough. But I think he was a good character as well. I really liked him, and then obviously I like the other characters as well, such as Stubbsy, the other professor. I think Stubbsy, he was played by the guy who was in the Seeds of Death. That's where I was able to remember him from, and the other side characters as well. They were quite good, and obviously I like the mutants themselves. And I think the Solonian mutants they weren't villainous, but obviously it was a bad side effect of the Solonians' mutation, and that's what the story is pretty much about. A lot of people's story hates it because it's long, it's a bit tacky, but I really like the mutants to be honest. It's a very fun. I wouldn't say it's a fun story, but it's a good watch. I think every time I watch the mutants, I have an appreciation for it. So it's a pretty good story, a pretty underrated story to say the least. Planet of the Spiders, my favorite John Pertwee story, a bona fide classic. I could literally go on and on and on about how much I love this story, but I love the spiders. The Doctor's regeneration was perfect. Sarah Jane was brilliant in it. Here it does give Mike Heat some form of redemption after his disastrous writing in Invasion of the Dinosaurs. Memorable scenes. Aside from that, I mean, it's including that car chase scene in part two, which is basically filler, but yeah, I still pretty much love the story. Carnival of Monsters. I'd say it's a near classic because I mean, I think it was a great story, but I do think it could have been darker. And the acting was good. I love how self aware the story was. And obviously, I think one of the characters and his female assistants was pretty much an allegory for the BBC themselves and the other people. The Doctor Who writers themselves, and yeah. I think we watched my review for what I think of the story. I mean, it's a bit foggy in that area. The Sea Devils, I think, is a near classic. I mean, I really love the Sea Devils. I mean, I'd say it's my favorite story of season 9, even though it gets a lot of flack because it's pretty much the same as the Silurians, but I think it makes it takes what the Silurians did and makes it a lot better. When I say that, I'm pretty much saying that that the humor in it was very. They pretty much added some humor and some light-hearted stuff into it. Plus, it wasn't really divisive or was black. It wasn't really as black and white as it was the Silurians was. I mean, he had this master in it, and that pretty much raised the tension in the story, and that pretty much when that was a very good scene. And obviously, I like the scene when the moment when the Doctor and the Master are pretty much having a sword fight around the prison, and obviously like the scene where the Master is pretty much watching the clangers, and yeah, it's a very fun story to say the least. And Doctor Who and the Silurians, another near classic. I mean, obviously this story is pretty dark. It's pretty dark. It's very dark. It's darker than the Sea Devils itself because it pretty much introduces like themes like how dangerous the Earth is, and I like how pretty much the characters aside from the Doctor, Liz, and the Elder Silurian were very morally ambiguous. Even the Brigadier himself, he was very unsure about the Silurians, and he even blew up the Silurians' base when the Doctor pretty much told him not to, and that was a very sad ending for the story. I mean, it's very dark as well. We even had like some sort of virus that pretty much happened like towards like, like after the middle of the story. The Silurian virus pretty much just almost wiped out everyone in London. That was pretty much very eerily similar to the COVID-19 pandemic we're pretty much going through right now as in the making of this video. So it's a very fun. So the Silurians, obviously, this is their first appearance. They were good. They were good villains, and I liked the design, and I liked the set designs as well. It was a very good story. My favorite. Spearhead from Space. That's not. No. Wrong choice. A bona fide classic. I think Spearhead from Space is actually my favorite regeneration story ever because it pretty much introduced the John Pertwee era in season 7 overall. I mean, it also has the first appearance of the Autons, and they were fantastic. Like, and I love how eerie the story is. What this was as well. And I love the scene where the Autons were breaking out of the streets, just wreaking havoc in central London, and obviously we see the Brigadier and Liz Shaw. Yeah, they were great in the story. This is pretty much like it's pretty much like it was like a pilot episode for Doctor, like a pilot for like the soft reboot they were doing. This is because the Doctor has been exiled. This is the first story of his exile, and obviously you see the Doctor's frustration, and John Pertwee pretty much played the frustration well. And this is obviously the first Doctor Who story to be filmed in color, and it looks fantastic. And not just in color. This is the only Doctor Who story, one of the few classic Who stories that were actually filmed shot entirely on film because of something that happened in the BBC television centre, and it looked like I was watching a movie, and they did a very good job with it, and it gave it that feels, and I really like that. So, Terror of the Autons, I put as a near classic. Very good story. Pretty much first story of the Master, Joe Grant, Mike Yates, and pretty much everything else. It pretty much gives another side to the Autons. I liked how the Autons weren't just shopping the dummies. I think they took on the appearance of like some circus thingies. I mean, they were quite good as well, and this story was quite I wouldn't say it's gruesome, but it does have some very gnarly moments, such as that sofa crushing that guy to death, and the master shoving pushing that guy off the radio telescope, pretty much foreshadowing Logopolis. I mean, it's a very good story. I'm really likable, although I do say it doesn't really reach the standards to what Spearhead from Space did. And yeah, The Curse of Peladon, I'd say it's a near classic, because I think it's a very good story. I love like the political aspects of it, and I loved how the Ice Warriors were how they were made out to be the main villains of the story, but then it was revealed that the Ice Warriors had actually renounced the violence, and that was a pretty nice. It was a nice twist to do, and obviously, I think the story was actually great, was underrated. And I loved Joe Grant's. I wouldn't say I liked. It was a good thing. I liked like the chemistry between Katie Manning and Michael Troughton, even though they were actually dating at the time. But it was a very nice. They had very nice moments, and it pretty much resembled what Joe was going through in Planet of the Daleks. But yeah, it's still a very, and as I said before, it's pretty much it's an allegory to the EU, and I think they did a good job in that. And the Ambassadors of Death, I'd say it's a near classic. If I did this like a while, like let's say this time last year, I would probably put it in stuck in the middle, but it's a near classic for me because it does have some great things. I love the tension in the story, and I love how the titular ambassadors of death weren't actually villains. They were just badly affected because I think they were actually aliens, but then obviously I think what they were taught why they were deadly because of the electric, because their touch can instantly kill someone, but it wasn't really their fault, and the actual enemies were actually the humans in this story, and that was a very nice twist. The acting was great. I loved the part 3 cliffhanger when the Doctor, was it part 3? No, I think it was the part 2 cliffhanger when I think the Mars Probe 7 was on the ground, and then the Doctor, Liz, Brig, and everyone else were like trying to at least get into contact with them, and then the Doctor saying we shouldn't kind of open because we don't know what's in there because it could be like mass radiation, and then obviously the people that were allegedly inside the Mars Probe 7 were just repeating the same thing. The Doctor was like, right, cut it open, but then obviously it was revealed it was just a tape recording. It was a very nice little story to say the least. So this is it. This is my final ranking for the John Pertwee era, and that pretty much this is me done for his era for now. So my next ranking video will probably be for the Tom Baker era, whenever that will be. So thank you for watching. Let me know what you thought of this video, and I'll see you guys very soon.